sore ribs.
That guy's playing through it. I mean, he's going through it.
If I tell everybody he's got sore ribs,
I know they're going to be shooting.
And you're
for
the
it.
linebacker, or you're a good DB from Vestavia like Will Brooks, you get a chance. You gonna hit him in the ribs?
Well, yeah, hit him in the ribs anyway.
That's why you.
If it's an ankle, am I going to twist that ankle?
Yeah, but I mean, you don't have to say it's his ribs. You just, I mean.
Well, T said, yeah.
I mean,
he did say. I'm saying you don't have to say that.
Well, they're not.
They're not. They're not saying anything. But I mean.
So what do you say? He's just injured.
Well, yeah. Upper body.
Yeah, he's just going through a lot. Now the coaching side, 15 penalties, and they are dumb penalties, and they're undisciplined. It's the most undisciplined team I'd ever seen, really, since last year. I mean, this team, if you go back and look last 2, 3, 4 years of Nick Saban, this team was in the – go check penalties. They were in the – I don't think they were in the top half of the penalties on the good side. They were in the top half of people committing penalties. This team has been undisciplined the last couple of years when it comes to penalties. They've made a lot of penalties. And you go back to last year, for all the people that complained about the snaps, the one thing you kept hearing was Jalen's got a problem with cadence. You know, he doesn't, you know how it's easier to, when you're doing the cadence quarterback, you're used to his cadence because you get it all the time. And I kept hearing last year that Jalen is not, doesn't give you a good cadence all the time. And I believe communication was a problem on Saturday, not just because of the crowd, but because of the cadence from Jalen there. Just from what I gathered from the post-game locker.
I only go to a couple of games a year, if that. And I think this was my last of the year, by the way. That was the loudest I remember, like an opening drive, and I think I tweeted that out. Like, that crowd was,
oh yeah,
they were blowing up.
But back to the coaching before we talk about the atmosphere. Listen, it's easy to say, okay, they've lost 2, and that's fine.
Yeah.
You know, they've lost 2 games. I thought the defense played better.
Yeah, gave up 200 rush yards. That's a lot, but
it
they weren't back-breaking rush yards.
But almost everything they did in the first half, they kind of gave back in the second half.
Yeah.
Like I thought, I mean, that was what was kind of disturbing if you're an Alabama fan. The end of times. Alabama 2 losses before November 1st. First time since 2007. It is Unlocked with Fox's Brock Huard. I am Lance Taylor. It is brought to you by mybookie.ag. Double that initial deposit when you mention the word next round. Very important keyword, next round. They're going to double the initial deposit. Our friends at mybookie.ag. World Series odds are up. Dodgers a minus 128 favorite right now on mybookie.ag over the Yankees. We will not get to baseball, but we will start in Knoxville, Tennessee. Brock, you saw it. Alabama goes down 24-17. 15 penalties. Jalen Milroe, as good as he was against Georgia, he was kind of that bad against Tennessee. Your biggest takeaway from Alabama losing by 7 on the road in Knoxville?
Well, let's just be clear. About 8 million people saw that. About 2 million saw the game that I was doing at the simultaneous time, okay? And I kept looking at my phone like, oh, come on, Alabama. Oh, for crying out loud. Make that a blowout. Okay, come on. We need some eyes in the desert in Tucson, and that was not happening because that game was compelling throughout. The penalties just obviously can't happen. I mean, it just can't. It just, at this stage of the season especially, you know, is one thing. I think the University of Washington, week 2, week 3 versus Wazoo, their first real opponent had 16 penalties, killed themselves. At this juncture of the season, that should and could and can never happen. What did Bill Walsh used to say? Every 100 yards is 7 points. 100 yards of penalties is 7 points on the scoreboard. And in many ways, that was the difference. And just listening to that discourse of you guys from earlier in the show about Jalen Milroe, I think it's becoming clear that he's maybe not system-wise for what Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan have done in the past with the guys that are throw-first guys, that this system right now is going to need some adjustments and some tweaks to his strengths because as a pocket passer and seeing and stretching the whole field and doing everything with precision in the passing game, it just is not developing.
Well, you know, and I wonder because there's a lot of people, and this is just – you know, this is a result of not winning, losing 2 of 3 games and losing to Vanderbilt and struggling against South Carolina and then losing to Tennessee. People start talking about QB2, and that is Ty Simpson, and he is a throw-first guy. He's got some athleticism, but he looks to be a guy that's been hanging around and maybe the next great Alabama quarterback. And there are people that are like, I think he should go to Ty. It's just hard for me to get over. After that, Alabama up 28-0 en route to beating Georgia. The next day, people are like, this guy's the number 1 overall pick. He's your Heisman Trophy winner. He was that good against Georgia. So it's almost like sometimes don't you have to adjust and build your system around a great player like Jalen Milroe?
You do. I think you do. I would not be calling for that change right now. That would be a panic move. And I know the state of Alabama is in a state of panic right now because of the place they find themselves in, that they are, not been used to for almost 2 decades with this kind of losing before the month of November. I just watched Mike McDonald go down to Atlanta and win a game after losing 3 in a row. We just talked to him this morning on our show, the head coach of the Seahawks. And that was one of the things I think you have to reinforce is here's the things we're doing well. The sky is falling to everybody else. Everybody else thinks we're terrible. But we know within these walls that we can do X, Y, and Z well. And you have just got to lean back into that. And we know that Jalen is an elite runner. And I think, and I don't know any of this, if I was in your market, if I was covering that team, if I was behind the scenes, I would be really curious of the tug of war, Lance, between Jalen Milroe wanting to be the number 1 pick, wanting to show that I can be a throw first guy, wanting to prove that I'm a pocket passer and use that running game as a wild card versus no. That may be better for your pro stuff down the road, but what I need you right now is to run it 15 times a game, because that is where you are elite. That is the tool in your bag that makes you a difference maker and a threat and a scared every D coordinator. And let's get back to calling a half dozen QB run, power run, counter read option, zone, read option, just all of it. Because that's where I would be curious. If I was in your seat, are we seeing a little tug of war here between players' agents, players' family, right? Wanting to be a top 10 pick where you've got to throw it more consistently and show that, or play to the strength of you at the collegiate level, which is just a running back, with elite running skills.
Well, that's, the interesting thing, because you look at your reigning MVP right now in the National Football League, that is Lamar Jackson. And he is a run-first quarterback. And so I think, that's a lot of the upside for Jalen Milroe, that intangible that you get that you can't get with a lot of quarterbacks. So I don't know. It is an interesting question. There are people that believe that Jalen Milroe is not 100% physically, and he did look like he was a little off. So, the one thing I do know, when you force 3 turnovers and a half, and I know you were in Tucson for a game we'll get to in a little bit with Colorado and Arizona, very impressed with the Buffaloes where they are right now at 5-2. But if you force 3 turnovers and you're only up 7-0 was the score at halftime, kind of got a feel. I was talking to some Tennessee fans, and even, these guys are probably 15 beers deep at this point, 21, 22-year-olds, and they're like, dude, we turned the ball over 3 times. We're only down 7-0.
Sure.
And it was a legitimate point. And I think Josh Heupel probably was able to sell that at halftime. You guys have played awful, and you're only down 7 at home.
100%. And we see this a lot in basketball, right? Well, this other team shot 80% from 3 and we're only down 5. Like, that is going to turn. That eventually they're not going to make 80% of the 3-pointers. So if we just keep doing what we're doing, they're going to eventually rim out, and we're going to close that lead, and we're going to take advantage of it. And when you are at home, right, you can weather that storm of turnovers usually a little bit better than you can out on the road, where those turnovers ignite crowds, where the momentum builds, where the confidence grows, and then it's an enormous uphill battle. But yeah, kudos to the strength of this Tennessee group, which they have shown this year, which is not what we thought it was the first few weeks, which was Nico and a big arm and all the offensive production. Kudos to the grit, kudos to the toughness. Kudos to a front seven that's got some dudes that made it difficult enough and weathered enough storms there defensively in that first half that they could finally find enough points to get a W.
I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask anyway before we close the door on Tennessee, Alabama. And you just brought up Mike McDonald and the big Seattle win on the road in the Mercedes-Benz Dome against the Falcons yesterday. It always goes back to the Seahawks for you. It always comes back to the Rams. Week 1 against Detroit, It goes to overtime. The offensive line was banged up. They didn't have any shot. But Cooper Kupp was targeted 18 times. He had 14 grabs with a touchdown. This past weekend, number 2, the true freshman, the 17-year-old Ryan Williams, targeted 18 times. The rest of that Alabama roster only targeted 23 times. Is there something to focusing on one guy too much?
It can be. It can be, and obviously that is not sustainable because, eventually defenses roll and have an opportunity to bracket and do things to try to limit some of that. And it also is like, well, we'll just count on the phenom, right? Well, we'll just count on Cooper Cup. We'll count on Ryan. Well, we'll count on DK. We'll count. No, no, no. You can't point the finger and count on anybody else. You got to do your job. And the best teams never have that kind of imbalance. I think at the halftime of our game in Tucson, the big receiver, Tedoroa McMillan for Arizona had been targeted 3 times. And I just said, that can't happen. You can't be struggling the way you're struggling, and your most dynamic and your best threat and your impact player is targeted 3 times. Like that just, I mean, credit's Colorado, but that just cannot happen with a young play caller there in Arizona. And sure enough, they come out first drive of the second half, they go down the field, it's target him 4 times and make that kind of adjustment. But you're not gonna win the SEC. You're not gonna beat top tier teams. You're not gonna beat the Georgias and the Texases and the Tennessees, LSUs, A&Ms even with that kind of imbalance. You need more weaponry that has come into life, and that unfortunately for Coach Sheridan and certainly for Coach DeBoer is not happening.
We had on your colleague earlier, Joel Klatt, and, obviously a guy that played at Colorado, played in a Big 12 championship game against that really good 2005 Texas. He was actually knocked out of that game. But I told him, I said, I can't believe, I was completely wrong. I didn't think Colorado would be this good, and they are getting better, and they're getting better defensively. So, I'll own it. They're sitting at 5-2. What I'm surprised with this brand and the way they completely dominated Arizona, and then even going back against a really good Kansas State team, they've got the lead late in that fourth quarter. How this team is not getting any respect, to not get 1 vote in the AP poll, to me is kind of crazy. You saw them up close and personal.
Yeah. Because I think, Lance, from afar, most people have the perception, frankly, I did to a degree, until you get in and you study them and you watch the game tape from afar, you just think it's pomp and circumstance, right? You think it's prime and it's the show and it's, it's Shador and it's, some plays, but just thin where it really matters. You can't be last in the country in running the ball, which I think they were, or second to last going into the game there in Arizona. Can't run for negative 29 yards. And I know that's built on a bunch of sacks, but you can't be that bad physically running a football and gain, I think, a tremendous amount of respect from the collective. But then when you dig in and you start to study it and you go, ooh, they got some pieces now. Like, they don't just have Ryan Williams and nobody else, right? This Wester kid, this Horn kid, obviously Hunter when healthy, they go 4, 5, 6 deep at receiver. Right. Shador is, facilitating as well as anybody in the country. He and Cam Ward, to me, have distinguished themselves in a QB class. It's going to be very, very meager come April in the NFL, but those two have distinguished themselves. And then to your point, you're stopping the run. You're hitting people. You're playing physical. The transfer from Houston, that little 5'11" fire hydrant, Wonkwo, the D tackle, is hard to move. The 2 linebackers, a 6-year player, a 5th-year player, played a ton of ball, are physical guys. The edge players from Pitt and Arizona State were some of their better players, and they know how to set an edge and play pretty violently and physically. And to me, that's the biggest difference. Last year did not feel sustainable. Last year was a lot of hype and attention and playmaking early and, big comeback wins. This has been like gritty and tough and physical, and win in Orlando and win in Tucson against great teams. No, but capable teams and the UCF, a veteran team that they just throttled. So CU loves me on the call, Lance. I know that. The last 4 years, they've not lost a game when yours truly has been on it. So they're going to hope, seeing Rick George, the AD, on the sidelines, I think they're going to make some phone calls and see down the stretch how many times I can do buff games, because they're at their best when we're on the call.
Noah Fafita is maybe 185 pounds. Small dude. Yes. He has been beaten to death these last 2 weeks in Provo against BYU, in the desert this past weekend against Colorado. 7 sacks this past week. Did you ask him about his rat tail, though?
Yeah, they're the braids, you know. He's got just kind of a lot of that Polynesian power and strength, and an unbelievably great kid. Like, sitting down with him, Lance, you would have never thought, like, man, the bubbles burst. Right, this was a preseason team expectation-wise in the Big 12 with Utah. That was like, yeah, man, they got all these. They got Fafita, and you bring back McMillan, and you got Manu, and you got a right tackle that's going to be an NFL pick. Like, you got dudes, and then the thing is just unraveled. They've got no depth They're beat up. Their O-line, save for the right tackle, has been a sieve. You've got a play caller that's a first-time play caller. They take it away from Dino Babers. I mean, it is just it's a mess. And then defensively, they've lost like, I don't know, 6 or 7 starters. I mean, they are just absolutely hammered with injury, and he's kind of left holding the bag. And, all the expectations that come with it. And having lived a little bit of a similar life, Lance, where 96, great team. I think we win like 9-2, 97. We got beat up a little bit, but elite talent, some high water marks, some big wins. And I come back to school my last year, and man, we were thin. And then once we got injured, yours truly took a beating, and yours truly, like physically, mentally, emotionally, was just in a spot I've never been in my life, and at times felt overwhelmed and underwater. And I fear for him after being the freshman of the year, having all the success with Jedfish, having a first round, receiver, a fourth round receiver, a first round left tackle, a tight end that made the team in Cincy. Like, he had some supporting cast around him that has left the building largely, and he's left holding the bag. And to your point, taking an absolute beating.
It is Unlocked with Fox's Brock Huard, brought to you by mybookie.ag. They will double your initial deposit when you use that code next round. That simple. Football season in full effect. So is winning season at mybookie.ag. I thought coming into the weekend, extremely dangerous to doubt the Georgia Bulldogs. But if I would have told you today you haven't seen the score, and I tell you Carson Beck's 23 of 41 for 175, 0 touchdowns, 3 picks, not one Bulldog has more than 45 yards receiving in Austin against the number 1 team in the nation. You think that final score is?
31-13 Texas.
Yeah. I think a lot of people thought Texas, we had it. I did back Georgia plus the 5. I just thought that they were getting so disrespected. But a lot of people were saying that Texas would already have this game in hand at halftime. It was 23-0 the other way.
Correct. Yeah, that was silly talk. Georgia hardened, battle tested for years, developing the callus and the grit to play on that stage, and even for Beck to perform that poorly, and again back kind of to that emotional toughness, that physical and mental toughness that goes with it. To respond. He was never great, but he at least kind of steadied the ship and turned off the turnover faucet individually. And then collectively, man, they were that front 7 now. Holy smokes. They got some creatures, right? I mean, they just got some dudes that are right, that are healthy, that make life, just miserable.
But it's almost like they can turn on the switch. You go back, Mississippi State, and look, Van Buren's got some, elusiveness to him. He's an athletic kid. But they didn't have a sack. You go back to Milroe, they didn't have a sack against them. And then they go 7 sacks on Saturday night in Austin. They held the Longhorns to 2 of 15 on third downs, 29 rushing yards. They forced 4 turnovers. It's like because they were finally called out, they got it all together.
You know what's interesting, Lance, and I'm hearing this more from offensive coordinators than maybe I did 10 years ago, certainly. And I know that, it's a drinking game during the NBA draft. Every time Jay Billis says length, right? Length and length and length. And you hear about it with the Syracuse zone back in the day with Boeheim, right? They just, and you could see it like go gadget arms. And these guys are so long. The number of coordinators now offensively that I'll talk to when they're playing the Georgias, they're playing the Oregons, they're playing the Ohio States. That's many times what they say. And you could see it just with your eyes when you watch a TV copy. It's like, man, Georgia feels like they just envelop so much more space than other teams do, right? That these guys that are 6'5", that linebacker, holy smokes. He looked like he was 3 players wide, and he can run, right? And he just eats up the space for you to operate. And as a quarterback, and for me, the biggest, the NFL was one thing, different game. But on the college level, and I know I've shared the story with you, but when I played the eventual national champion Nebraska Cornhuskers, and sitting there in the first drop of the game, you're like, damn, these guys are just on me, right? Even when they're blocked, they feel like they're just on you because they're so big. Grant Wistrom was, 6'5", and Rucker was 6'4", and Christian Peter in the middle was 330 pounds, and Rucker, or the other linebacker, Jay Foreman, could just run, and you just felt them immediately. And you could see that with Quinn Ewers. Like, I had not had much of that. Certainly not this year. I mean, Michigan didn't present that picture. Washington last year in the semifinal didn't present that picture. I mean, you could see him. I could, and maybe I'm projecting on him, but I'm like, ooh, yeah, they've shook him, and to the point so much that Sark had to pull him and then throw poor Arch in there, and he too was like, holy cow, this is a different beast that we're dealing with today, as he was kind of discombobulated and go back to Ewers. But man, kudos to Kirby. He used every bit of that injustice, right? He used every bit of that chip to put a boulder and those guys on their shoulder, and those guys played lights out.
Much like the NFL now that we've expanded to 12 teams, it's going to be teams getting hot and staying healthy and getting better. And you look at LSU, go back week 1 in Vegas to USC, they lose that game, and they've won 6 consecutive games. And I thought probably the best, definitely defensively they looked, was Saturday night in Fayetteville. Ended up running away with that game 34-10 over Arkansas. Nussmeier, solid quarterback. Blake Baker has got that defense playing extremely well. If they played this USC team, which we'll get to in a little bit, that has lost 4 consecutive games, I think they probably win the game by double digits now, but they're still undefeated in the SEC. They're number 8. They've got a big game against Texas A&M. Do you like what you're seeing from LSU right now?
Yeah, you do, because they have at the line of scrimmage exactly what I was just talking about, and especially offensively, right? That opener of the season, and openers are always tricky, playing against other people, seeing a new defensive scheme with Danton Lynn there at SC having all the pieces that they don't have now. And my gosh, Lance, are they decimated with injuries? Right? You talk about teams getting hot and teams getting not. Arizona decimated with injuries, SC decimated with injuries, Utah decimated with injuries. And it just is, they've fallen off of a cliff. LSU is not. And neither is A&M on the other side. And it's going to be an unbelievable matchup of some teams at the line of scrimmage that will have a lot of scouts. I'd be willing to bet, I know there were a ton at Georgia and Texas. I'd be willing to bet, as much as the NFL covets big people, and big people are the hardest to find, the least amount of supply, I would love to see with that matchup how many NFL scouts, and not just scouts, how many NFL GMs get down there to see some dudes that they know are going to be on a collision course for the NFL, because that game's going to have a whole bunch of them at the line of scrimmage.
There were a lot of SEC fans that might have been surprised, but they were excited about what went down in Austin, because they didn't want Texas to roll into this conference year 1 and completely dominate. That has not been a problem for Oklahoma. They're on the other side of this. Seth Littrell was fired yesterday, the offensive coordinator, first-year offensive coordinator. Deep Oklahoma ties there. Venables has got to go in a different direction. They burned the red shirt of Jackson Arnold by bringing him back in the game. They were down 21-0, and I heard this before a lot of Oklahoma fans could get in their seats to get into the stadium. 9 minutes to go in the first quarter, they get completely dominated, and they seem like a team that is actually getting worse as we move forward.
Yeah, because when you don't have the depth that these teams in the SEC have cultivated and developed over the years, you go back and look at recruiting classes, Lance, over the last 10 years, and what do you see? You see even like the Floridas and the Tennessees. It's not just the Georgia and Bamas at the top and LSU. Like, there is great depth in those recruiting classes with the biggest supply. Go back to just a simple economics of supply and demand, and like the biggest supply of big people and difference makers is down there in Florida and Georgia and Texas and Louisiana and Alabama to recruit and pull from. And that's why so many of those SEC schools over the years have put together the kind of recruiting classes that they have. So yeah, not terribly surprised to see Oklahoma struggle, because, Steve Sarkisian knew when he went into this thing and went to Texas, okay, I've got to build this to deal with that. Right? Having experience at Bama and having coached in the conference and having that like lens of, yep, okay, I know it. Now, Brent Venables is, come on, I'm not being naive. He too knew in his years at Clemson and competing against Bama and Georgia and all the rest. Like, he knew he was up against it too, but they didn't recruit the horses and bring in the firepower that Steve has brought to Austin to compete at the level they have. Not surprised to see Oklahoma struggle. I am sadly also not surprised to see some of the chaos. Seth Littrell gets fired. Andy Ludwig at Utah resigns as the offensive coordinator. Like, this is what happens when that playing field gets leveled, when, it's a 12-team playoff, when expectations are not met. It's one thing when it's the 4 superpowers that are left in the playoff, and you can easily say, well, we're not one of those. What do you want me to do? We're not Bama. We're not Georgia. We're not Ohio State. We don't have those classes. We don't have that money. Well, you don't have that excuse anymore. Now it's 12 teams. And I'm seeing BYU and I'm seeing Iowa State, right? And I'm seeing the military schools and I'm seeing these schools like compete and give themselves a shot for the playoff. That is now the expectation in many of these places that wasn't there before this expansion.
Yeah, and I said this earlier on the show. I believe that Auburn is the worst team in the SEC. You can make an argument for Mississippi State. It does seem with Van Buren they're getting a little bit better. But if I'm an Auburn fan sitting at 2-4, 0-4 in conference, and I look, and one of the teams you didn't mention where ESPN's College Game Day will be there for the first time in the history in Bloomington this weekend as your alma mater, Washington, rolls in to take on Indiana. But you got to give Kirk Cignetti so much credit because this Indiana team, say what you want about the schedule, they have completely curb stomped everybody in front of them. And a lot of people believe this would be the week with the black shirts coming in and Matt Rule in year 2 with Nebraska, and Raiola would have a big game, and he was awful with the 4 turnovers. But this Indiana team, even when Curtis Rourke, as good as he is with all that experience, went out with the injury, with the thumb injury, we'll see how long he's going to be down. You bring in a backup quarterback that, obviously wasn't as good, but Taven Jackson was 7 of 8, 2 touchdowns, no picks.
Yeah. Yeah, it was actually my mom and dad were in town, and we were chatting about that a little bit because my little brother at SC is obviously struggling mightily, and he was talking about, well, look at what Indiana could. And I said, Dad, this is not a normal circumstance. Right, this is a guy in Cignetti, the coach there, that brought basically half of his James Madison team that was loaded with dudes. At James Madison, you can recruit that Virginia Beach area, and there is a lot of talent there. And those guys were as hungry as their head coach was, right? And they had a ton of success at James Madison, right? Won a ton of ball games and never got the respect. And now it's like, okay, here we go, man. It's almost like a bunch of just caged, just animals ready to go and show like we freaking belong from a coaching staff, and then incorporate in with all of your players. And then, by the way, know some of the players in that league that can play as well, and from Old Dominion and other places, let's bring them along. And you just see a relentless urgency, just a relentless urgency. And I thought Joel Klatt nailed it. And I'm sure you all talked about it on the show today. These are not like transfers that haven't done it. These aren't transfers that are like, wow, we're hoping, or, maybe he's a kick down, or maybe he had 5-star talent and he never really played. No, these are dudes that have all played, including the QB that was MAC Player of the Year. These are dudes that have done it, just have not gotten the exposure, and now they're just hungry. And here is the question, though, Lance. They're going to have to handle a level of prosperity that is different. It's one thing to climb the mountain. It's one thing to be told you can't. It's another thing to get near that mountaintop and then be heralded and praised as like the greatest ever, to see if you can still have that same level of agitation and energy and anger and urgency and all the stuff that's brought them to this spot.
It reminds me, and this might be a bad comparison, and maybe just because they cover every game, but it was 95 or 96, Jake Plummer, Bruce Snyder, that Arizona State team that finally lost a game, I think, to Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. But people just didn't believe it was like, oh, well, this week, look at who's on the schedule. And they just continued to go in, and they never were flat. And I think you get that again. Again, you've got a backup quarterback, so you don't know how he's going to prepare all week as the starting quarterback. And mentally, what does it do between the ears from him? But if they go out and play the way they've played, Washington's been up and down. You were on the call in Iowa City a couple of weeks ago. If it's that Washington, Indiana's not going to have a problem. Now, Washington's still a very talented team. But I start looking at the schedule. I said it earlier. I think Indiana, worst case, is going to go 10-2. And then you're going to start to dissect the schedule. But they have beaten the hell out of everybody. So I think at 10-2, they've still got a great shot of getting in. The only game they're going to be underdogs in is next to last week, November 23rd, when they go to Columbus to take on Ohio State. But if Indiana's 11-1, they're for sure in. I think 10-2, they still get in.
Yeah, I think I'd feel a whole lot better if the QB was healthy, obviously. And that is always an X factor because that guy is dealing, and he's the tip of the spear, right, of that confidence that I'm talking about. Because you can have a bunch of just ballistic, fired up, urgent dudes, but you also have to have that just calm, confident, totally have this. And the way that he operates, and I know I got to watch the first quarter and a half of that game, and you could see the difference, right? With a Raiola, who's a talented guy, who made some great throws at times, who salvaged some things and kept him in a little bit early, versus just a machine of experience. Just that time on task, that there's nothing you're going to throw at me that I haven't seen, and you do lose that. I mean, that guy was playing at such a high level and instilling so much confidence that this week will be interesting. Game day comes to town for the first time in the history of the school. All of the attention, all of the eyes. You know, it was a little bit last week with Big Noon, certainly there, but now there is even more because of what you just did in that 56-7 curb stop that you talked about. So just handling prosperity. I don't know what that early line is. Do you know what the early line is on that Washington Indiana game?
Indiana 7
because
with backup quarterback.
Okay, there you go. That feels about right.
Yeah.
I was thinking if that was going to be a double-digit kind of number, Washington's got a lot of talent, and they're going to threaten the back end of that secondary, which is vulnerable, with their receivers and just the scheme and the play calling that Jed does. So yeah, 7 feels about right. And we'll see if that backup can carry the same kind of confidence.
Before we transition to the NFL, back to USC, I know you have a Huard on the staff there. And look, Eric Gentry, Anthony Lucas, those are huge defensive losses. My problem is it is 4 consecutive losses when you're leading in the second half. And, to me, Lincoln Riley is a good enough offensive mind where you have, worst case, even with the injuries, light talent. But I still think they have been better than every team they've played, and they're still finding ways to lose these heartbreaking games. In 4 consecutive losses, when you're losing to Minnesota and you're losing to Maryland, to me, that's a problem for this USC brand. And look, I get injuries are a thing, but they shouldn't be at 3-4 right now.
No, they should be probably 5-2 right now. And I would contest. Penn State's got more dudes than they do.
Yeah. I'll
James
give you
Franklin's
that. Yeah.
built up culture of that program. Michigan, when they faced him at that time, did not know all of the limitations that they had. And as far as just big people goes, and especially Michigan's front and some of their pieces, that one's probably a wash. And that's a game that they couldn't tackle and couldn't finish. Absolutely had and should have had. You can't lose to Maryland. You can't get a kick blocked. Can't throw a pick. I mean, it is a hard. We talk about momentum always in a positive way, right? And you can feel it at times in a stadium. Really, in a basketball arena, I think that's where you really feel it. Sometimes in a World Series game or some of these playoff games, but football you do too, and you feel that momentum. And we always use it as a positive, or 9 out of 10 times. But when it starts to go the other way, right? And you get in that spot and you're like, oh my gosh, they just got this 2-point conversion. Oh my gosh, we just got this kick block. You could almost feel this, oh my gosh, we're going to find a way to lose this thing. That just negative energy and that negative momentum. And it's cascading on them. They had a lead in all 4 games, I believe, in the fourth quarter, not just the second half. In the fourth quarter of those games, they lose 4 of them by a combined 14 points. 14 points away from being 7-0. And being in the top 5 of the country, and instead it is finding ways to lose, finding and losing key contributors in your front 7 where you don't have any depth. And a secondary this week, thankfully they're playing Rutgers. It doesn't throw it very well because their secondary is going to be beat to heck this week as well on a Friday night game that I will be on the call down in L.A.
It is Unlocked with Fox's Brock Huard. It is brought to you by our friends at mybookie.ag. If you want to wager on that Rutgers-USC game, or USC, I think, is a 13.5-point favorite right now, mybookie.ag, put in the code next round. Next round, they're going to double that initial deposit. As we switch to the NFL, never doubt Mike Tomlin. Russ was cooking again. We will get the thoughts and opinions of Fox's Brock Huard on the other side right here on this edition of Unlocked.
Follow The Next Round on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Next Round Live.
Are you tired of buying your CPAP mask and supplies online only to be disappointed? It's time to visit CPAP Plus, your locally owned and operated CPAP shop that prides itself on personal service. Come see what you're buying at CPAP Plus with 3 convenient locations in Pelham, Highway 280, and now open in Trustful. Drop by for a free CPAP checkup and free filters, no appointment needed. Plus, sign up for their giveaway for a chance to win a free travel CPAP machine. Just Google CPAP Plus or visit any of those 3 locations.
Hey, this is Matt Roth, the franchisee of Walk On Sports Bistro in Birmingham. With the kickoff of football season, come visit us at one of our 3 locations, Stadium Trace, Greystone, or Trustville. Come enjoy our scratch kitchen menu while watching one of our 80 TVs. Whether you're looking for a pre- or post-game celebration, game day, or date night, we've got you covered. It's all about the win at Walk On Sports Bistro. Walk On, where everybody needs a little playing time.
In some places, football is a sport. In Alabama, it's a fine art. New Life Art is proud to announce Daniel A. Moore's upcoming painting, Deuces Wild. This season, Bama is blessed with a pair of very talented deuces. The pair played a huge role on both sides of the ball in the Tide's amazing 41-34 victory over number 2 Georgia. Deuces Wild will portray the unbelievable game-winning 75-yard touchdown catch by deuce number 1, Ryan Williams, late in the fourth quarter. The Dogs' last chance drive was stopped by deuce number 2, Xavier Brown, as he made the game-saving interception in the end zone, which will be celebrated by a small artist's remark in the bottom margin of each print. Go to danielmooreart.com to see the artist's preliminary sketch and take advantage of special pre-publication pricing for Deuces Wild. Also available, The Legend, Daniel Moore's final tribute to Coach Nick Saban. Order now at danielmooreart.com.
Just because you've quit going to the gym, it doesn't mean that you have to quit gym altogether. Dunaway, that is. With our Next Round podcasts open 24/7, 365, you can access gym anytime you'd like. While you may have done away with your treadmill routine, our version of Dunaway is standing by ready to get you back to your absolute best. Find all that lovely Jimmy D-led content on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and in the podcast section of nextroundlive.com. This message is sponsored by Jimmy Crypto Inc. and Jimmy Crypto for President.
From the creators of The Next Round comes 2 new sites, covercrimson.com and thebarnauburn.com. 2 team sites with the same excitement and information-driven content that you get every day on The Next Round. Live daily shows, recorded shows, free of charge, plus premium content with insider information starting at just $1. And it's the perfect gift for the Alabama or Auburn fan in your family. Covercrimson.com or thebarnauburn.com. Sign up today.
Happy football season. At the Next Round, we strive to make our loyal listeners feel like they're a part of the action all season long. My name is Emily Grace McWhorter, and I do that by bringing you along for any given Saturday in Auburn or Tuscaloosa. From pregame warm-ups, touchdowns that make you feel a part of the play, and everything in between, our goal is to make you feel like you're inside Bryant Denny or Jordan Hare. Follow along on our social media at Next Round Live on Instagram, X, and Facebook. Also, check out thebarnauburn.com and covercrimson.com while you're at it. Here's to fall Saturdays.
From the creators of The Next Round comes 2 new sites, covercrimson.com and thebarnauburn.com. 2 team sites with the same excitement and information-driven content that you get every day on The Next Round. Live daily shows, recorded shows, free of charge, plus premium content with insider information starting at just $1. And it's the perfect gift for the Alabama or Auburn fan in your family. Covercrimson.com or thebarnauburn.com. Sign up today.
What's up, everybody? This is Mayor Woodfin, the mayor of the city of Birmingham. The McDonald's Magic City Classic, presented by Coca-Cola, returns to Legion Field October 26th. Watch the parade fill the streets of Birmingham. Turn up at the Coors Light tailgate party, enjoy the bands at halftime, and of course, bring that magic into the stadium. The best seats are selling fast. Tickets start at just $25. You don't want to miss it. Get your tickets now at magiccityclassic.com.
New AP poll has Oregon number 1 with 59 of 61 first place votes. 1 loss, Georgia 2, Penn State, Ohio State, Texas, Alabama down to 5th.
So before we get to the NFL, Fox's Brock Huard right here on Unlocked on the Next Round platform. Again, go to mybookie.ag. They will double your initial deposit when you put in Next Round. That is the code word at mybookie.ag. So I've been to Tucson once in my life. We had a sports talk radio convention back in the late 90s, and I was still in my 20s. So I was like, I got to check out the Tucson nightlife. And I went to some random bar, and there was a shooting in that bar that night, which is really crazy. Tucson seemed a little rough around the edges.
Rough.
I wouldn't assume that Tucson is a really good college football town.
No, not. It's a basketball town. It's an amazing basketball town. The McHale Center is like absolutely rocking, and a little bit, not too dissimilar. Chapel Hill is beautiful. I got my kind of Chapel Hill blue on. It's not a Carolina shirt, but Uncle Luke would like that, where he played back in the day. But these basketball, Kansas, right? These basketball first schools, really hard to also be a football first and to have kind of that football passion. And yeah, the Tucson, that was a little rougher town. We went to lunch at a good spot, and someone was telling me, and I don't know if this is true, maybe it's just urban legend. I apologize if there's Wildcats fans listening now.
There's not.
But I have been told that the basketball recruits, there's a certain way to get from the airport to campus. There's like one way, and avoid some of this other area that was just that we didn't avoid after lunch. And I was like, whoa, this is a little rough, a little rough down there in Tucson. But before we get to NFL, I need to know most important, and this I was thinking about you all weekend long. Like, man, I hope Lance bounces back. And I hope, and we can all have a rough weekend.
Yeah.
But I need Lance, after one of the worst weekends he'd ever had in the history of doing what he's doing. He told me last week, I trust myself. I trust my process. I trust my algorithms. I trust my years of experience, and I'm not going to panic over a bad weekend. So I need to know, Lance, how was it?
Well, the week was good. I ended up being 16-12 the entirety of the week, and we've still got one game tonight. I am playing the Arizona Cardinals. It is a free play. It is against the Chargers, +1 at home tonight. Hopefully, Tiny Kyler will play well. We shall see. I was 8-2 going to the weekend, 6-7 on Saturday. Not great, but we survived. 2-3 yesterday. Not great. We survive. Some bad breaks. We had Detroit, we have Minnesota against Detroit. Thought we'd get home there. The only one that I hated that I backed really was the New York Giants. That was embarrassing against Philadelphia, which we can get to that game in a second. The game I didn't.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say the game I didn't touch was Russell Wilson last night with Pittsburgh, because I really didn't know what Mike Tomlin was doing. I thought, honestly, Justin Fields had more upside. I don't think I was in the minority here. I believed it was the right guy to play. Watching Russell over the last couple of years under Sean Payton at Denver, he just seems like, everything that was Russell is gone from that body. And I got to give him credit, man. He went out. He played well last night with 3 total touchdowns. He didn't turn the football over. They had to kind of get in rhythm from the first quarter on. But once they did, they win the game going away. And so Mike Tomlin, there's a reason he's never had a losing season as a head coach.
Yeah, because he knows, I think, the personnel and the depth of it and what they're capable of so much more, no matter how much you study, no matter what numbers you look at. He's got a daily 8, 9, 10 hours with these guys to know what they're capable of. And I thought Collinsworth made a good point. And frankly, there's times, Lance, that I watch these games and I think, okay, how would I go about trying to bring context, trying to bring stories that haven't been shared before, analysis and experience that may be a little bit different. I thought Chris did a good job with that last night. And it kind of ties back to our first conversation about Jalen Milroe in Alabama. So you want to run the ball, right? You know that you want to be a run, play action team, play to your defense, the NFL game, and Tomlin knows it inside and out. It's complementary ball. That's how you give yourself a chance each and every week. It's what Russell did for 10 years with Pete, which I got to learn and watch. And I'm like, man, why the rope-a-dope? Why are we playing this way? Well, it's always to get the game to the fourth quarter and give yourself the best chance to win. And then you've got to make a decision if you're Mike Tomlin. Would it be better to use Justin Fields' running ability and that skill set, or would it be better to have a guy that can really still throw the ball down the field? Not intermediate, not quick, not some of that stuff, but I'm talking about the moon balls. I'm talking about the deep shots. I'm talking about stretching the field with Pickens and these guys that can run, and a tight end that can stretch it and run. And I thought Collinsworth made a good point that maybe it's a little counterintuitive, or maybe it's not. But you think, well, Justin Fields would be the best, right? With the zone read and the run game off of the run action. And Chris in Pittsburgh showed last night that maybe it's actually pulling that defense, stretching that defense. You want to help your run game? Get those safeties heels at 10 yards and not at 7 yards, right? You want to improve the passing game? Instead of those corners squatting, have the fear of God that they're going to throw a moon ball over your head. And that was a decision that Tomlin made, again, banked on seeing the Pickens and the rest of his personnel up close and personal in ways that we don't always and are not privy to.
I thought it was interesting to make the move there because that was such a big game. When you start to look at the schedule, and I'm not going to say that you've probably jumped ahead and looked at Pittsburgh's schedule, but I'm looking at it right now. Getting that win there to go to 5-2, and we'll see what Baltimore does tonight in Tampa. Obviously, if they win, you got a two-way tie atop the AFC North. But Pittsburgh's got the Giants at home. That's a win. Then they got to go to the Commanders. My point is this schedule is going to get really difficult. Outside of the Giants and the Cleveland home and home, they've got in D.C. against the Commanders. They've got the Ravens. They've got to go to the Bengals, to the Eagles, to the Ravens. They've got the Chiefs and the Bengals to end the season. I mean, the schedule is brutal.
Yes. And I think against many of those teams, even if you are and Justin Fields can create with his legs, what's Baltimore going to do? They're going to stop the run, right? I mean, what's Philly going to be capable of doing in their front? They're going to stop the run. So it's great that Justin Fields can create and he can run a little bit, but man, to really, and furthermore, like if we're really going to beat Patrick Mahomes, we're going to have to outscore him, right? And we're going to have to put more points than 17 or 20 that Justin Fields was getting you. And at least he got a shot with his arm, which has not lost anything. Sure, he's lost some steam in his legs. Yes, he's no longer the wizard, wiggling out of all sorts of things that he did, especially early in his career in Seattle in such unbelievably imaginative, fun ways for us to watch. But Duke can still spin it deep and still threaten you with the deep ball and still got great touch, and that was on display last night.
Maybe the NFL game of the season so far yesterday in Minnesota with Detroit outlasting the Vikings 31-29. And, I go back to when Jared Goff was drafted number 1 overall, being a big Rams guy back in 2016. I was like, I'd rather have Carson Wentz. And for a minute, I thought Carson Wentz looked like the best player in the NFL before that injury, ironically, against the Rams. Jared Goff always seemed a little timid, but man, this guy can just ball. He is a top 5 quarterback right now. Did you ever, going back to the Cal days, and one of the things I brought up, and obviously you got to have surrounding talent, but Jared Goff had never beaten a top 25 team. And this is why these guys get paid to do it, and I don't, because I never saw Jared Goff being a franchise quarterback, but even more so when, in March of 21, he is dealt to Detroit for Matt Stafford and all those number ones, and I felt like it was a banishment. I felt like Jared Goff was being banished to Detroit. I didn't know if he would ever start. I knew his career wasn't going to be revived. And I got to give the kid a ton of credit for being mentally strong enough to be the guy that Sean McVay doesn't want and to be the backside of that trade and to be able to flourish. And maybe the best team in football right now. But did you ever see Jared Goff playing at this level?
No. And even early on with Jeff Fisher there with the Rams, I mean, they were just a punching bag, and he was
0-7 as a starting quarterback his first year.
Yeah, just assaulted and humiliated in some of those games as well. But what you can't test is that grit and that resolve. And I would also say, and this has stood the test of time, and why CJ Stroud has done what Bryce and Richardson and some of these guys haven't, is you just can never take away or minimize anticipation and accuracy, right? It's kind of like the equivalent in pitching to just command. Now, velo, can get you big money, and velo can be awesome to see and overpowering. It's so fun to see someone throw 100 miles an hour. But, he's kind of like just Greg Maddux. I mean, he just has unbelievable command and accuracy. And then for quarterbacks, unlike pitchers, you then have to have anticipation and spatial anticipation to see where things are and throw it to places and throw people open, and the things that he is also tremendous at. Doesn't have a big arm, can't make plays with his legs on the move, doesn't really create. But you want to play on schedule, and you want to play on time, and you want to play on target, you're absolutely right. He's one of the 5 best doing it. Got a supporting cast and an offensive line that you have to have with a quarterback like him as well. You put him behind some of the civs in the NFL, put him behind the Raiders O-line, and you're not seeing the Jared Goff. You're not seeing that anticipation and accuracy. But behind arguably the best in the league, he's getting to flourish with the rest of his battery mates.
Look, I know Kevin O'Connell is a really, really good offensive coach. Justin Jefferson, arguably the best wide receiver in the National Football League. Sam Darnold made a couple of mistakes yesterday. I've seen this story before where a team gets out of the gate hot in September and October. They lose a game, they lose a couple. My hope is Minnesota Thursday night rolling into SoFi to take on the Rams. Cooper Kupp will be back. Do you think, like Sam Darnold, it's been a great story, but he's got to have some ups and downs this year, right? I mean, the track record's the track record.
Correct. Yeah. And, he too has a couple nice pieces on his offensive line, and they do some great things within their run game. And I do think O'Connell is really good at distributing the ball and knowing what Sam is and what he's not. And yeah, if you're a Rams fan, you catch him at the right time, I think. This is not a matter of, oh gosh, they just lost and kind of wish they'd won. No, I think you'd rather have a little doubt, a little thought like, man, if I make mistakes, yeah, maybe we could be in some trouble. So yeah, you do build up that resume and that track record for a reason. That back of the baseball card they always talk about in that sport. Back of that baseball card for Sam has been turnover prone and mistake prone. For Vikings fans, got to hope that was just a one-timer and he gets right Thursday. For Lance, you got to hope it's just the beginning of the faucet that turns on.
So in the offseason, and look, the way he played in the second half of last year's NFL season, he was maybe the best quarterback down the stretch in Jordan Love. He got paid, and I'll say it, a shit ton of money in the offseason to be the next Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers. And look, they get the win yesterday against a really good Texans team, and that was a fun back-and-forth game. My fear for Jordan Love, though, is he just turns it over at an alarming rate. I mean, he's got
he does, right?
Yeah, 8 picks in his last 5 games, and they're sitting at 5-2, and that's all well and good right now. But Matt LaFleur's got to be really, really concerned that, elite quarterback play, you cannot turn the football over at that high of a rate and continue to have success week in and week out.
Do you, or is it back to your Tennessee question of, man, if we turn it over and still are right in this thing, like we know that it's going to eventually slow down. I mean, I think if you're a Packers fan, you're probably kind of excited and thrilled to be 5-2 with some of those mistakes. Now he's dug himself out of some of those holes. I think that would be the response, Lance, is again, kind of talking about grit and toughness and having played the position. Sometimes when you throw a couple, guess what? You become check down Charlie and you don't take some of that risk. And maybe, again, kind of positive and negative, the yin and the yang of it is, yeah, man, I got $250 million or whatever. Like they believe in me, so I can cut it loose. And if I make mistakes, I'm not playing for a contract. I got my money. So now I can play with some reckless abandon and some fearlessness, which is great, right? You want to be able to do that. You just got to rein it in. You got to rein it in a little bit.
But seriously, how do you get your confidence back when you are a quarterback and you're getting criticized? And I think it's even different from the day you played. I think with social media, I think unfortunately these kids look into it too much. And I'll go back to like a Jalen Milroe situation. How do you build your confidence back as a quarterback when you are struggling?
You just have to have, and I was just chatting with the college coach about this, with their QB that's battling some of it. And Lance, it's not even the QB, and that has not changed. 25, 30 years ago when I played, I was busy. I was in school. It's when we actually went to class, and I had chemistry. And then I had, lunch in the hub with, 20,000 other students. And then I went into the facility and we lifted and then we practiced and then we watched tape. And then I actually went home to my dorm room and studied. And it was easy for me to disassociate from that stuff. And back then it was just talk radio, like there wasn't the internet. There wasn't all these social realms. But who it was hard on was your family. And, I call home. Hey, how you guys doing? Oh, yeah. I hate what I'm hearing on the radio. What are you hearing? It was easy to disassociate. And I think honestly for players, that's what you got to do. You just absolutely have to unplug. You can't get on the social media. You got to go to work. You got to go to class. You got to go lift. You got to grind. You got to just dig in. The hard part is your family, your friends, your loved ones, your buddies, and they don't unplug, right? So that can be sometimes.
I know Mama Huard,
line to draw.
She wore it hard. I mean, she was y'all's biggest supporter in going to all these games. And I don't know if you've seen the clip that's going around, and I think it's viral by now, but Jalen Milroe kind of getting into a confrontation in Neyland with some Tennessee fans. And look, you've got athletes. You've got a son that, God willing, he's going to play FBS Division I Power 4 football. As a parent going to these games, I know we're getting completely off here, but I do find it really fascinating because I'm one of those guys, I can take a lot of things, but if it came to my kid, that's a different story. And you've got to be in a situation where you can hear some of this stuff, I would assume, and drown it out. But then it gets to a point, if you're just getting completely torched and you're hearing negative when it comes to your kid. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you haven't dealt with that with the Huard girls, with the Grizz at Montana. Mm-hmm. But it will with Titus, it's going to be a different situation, right?
Well, that's, why I do this media stuff, to save a little coin so I can buy a suite and, be separated from all the rest of that stuff.
Wise play.
What's funny was, here you go. Here's another little story. This one I know I've not shared with you. We had an Oregon game a couple years ago, and we're on a flight from Eugene to LA, and it was my way to get, back to, I think, Denver, and my producer was on the same flight. And so we get on the plane and we rush to the airport. We made the flight from Eugene, and I'm sitting next to this woman, and we start talking, and my producer, we get, off the flight. He's like, "Man, you were sure chatty with that woman. You like talked to her the whole flight." And I'm like, "You know who that was?" And he's like, "No." And I'm like, "That was Herbert's mom." Okay, so take it down a notch with me chatty with a mom. Okay, and but it was great because she had Patrick, her son, at a tight end at Oregon, and she's like, "I love it. I love going to his games. He's a tight end. It's really hard going to Justin's games as the quarterback of an NFL team, and I sit in a suite, and even in the suite, I got to separate myself at times because it's really, really difficult with all that expectation and noise." So. Yeah. Okay, Bo, take it down a notch. I wasn't just talking to another woman. I'm a happily married man. This happened to be a Herbert, and it was fascinating right along those lines that, that position draws a bit of an earful at times.
How do you think, and this is interesting, and look, I'm getting more personal with you, but if he plays at a big-time level, do you continue to do what you're doing for Fox, or do you want to be at his games?
Oh yeah, we're going to come to that crossroads, I think, pretty quickly. So I hope I can still do games. We'll see.
Oh, you were great doing NFL games, though. I mean, I don't know if that's a possibility.
Yeah.
If you do a Thursday night game here and there, maybe do some Sunday games for the network.
Yeah, we're getting to crossroads. I'll send you, Lance. I'll let you take a look at little Titus's tape from over the weekend. He made a throw. Honest to God, he'll be 15 at the end of next month, so he's 14. He made a throw, and I sent it to Sam, who's at Utah, my nephew there, big 5-star recruit back in the day, and my brother Damon. I sent it to them. I said, "There is no way at 14 any of us were making this throw. I don't even think I could make this throw. I'm being dead honest. I don't think I could have made this throw when I was 18 or 19 years old."
What level is he playing at right now?
So he's a backup on the varsity,
okay.
And then he plays the JV games, and is a freshman there. But he's like 6'5.5", and he threw a ball like with getting hit almost 60 yards in the air. I'm like, how do you do that? But these kids today are so much way, way, way more advanced than we ever were when we were playing, back in our day. So we'll see. We'll cross that road when we get there, but it may be sooner than later.
You talked about kind of the lack of what would be viewed as franchise quarterback. We'll get to this next week because I do want to get into franchise quarterbacks right now in college football, but we'll knock that down next week.
I think there's only two. I think it's only Cam and Shedeur. I think this is going to be a really lean class. Carson Beck to me feels like a second rounder. Quinn Ewers feels very mortal. Like I think there's going to be only those two guys. But we'll go into that next week.
It is Unlocked with Fox's Brock Huard, brought to you by mybookie.ag. Remember, code word next round. They're going to double that initial deposit. Like, subscribe, give us a thumbs up. Always great work. Enjoy your trip this week. We'll talk to you next week. That is Fox's Brock Huard right here on Unlocked.